Fuck HIPAA, my new patient can literally talk me into anything and I have concerns.
Disclaimer, the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.
On August 12, 2017, the Las Vegas Police Department conducted a sweep of a homeless encampment. Shortly after the sweep commenced, an intoxicated youth stumbled over and told the officers to go back to the substation. The officers obeyed these instructions. Upon return to their substation, they were asked to explain their actions. When they were unable to provide a satisfactory explanation, they were once again sent out to complete the sweep. Approximately 10 minutes after they arrived, the youth once again approached the officers. This time, he told them to go to a location approximately 40 minutes away from the encampment. Once again, the officers willingly obeyed the youth's instructions. By the time the officers returned to the encampment, most of the inhabitants had taken the opportunity to gather their belongings and scatter. 2 weeks later, dispatch received an emergency call about an unresponsive teenager. EMS arrived and revived him. Upon returning to consciousness, the youth sat up. When asked, he introduced himself as Mikey. When the responders attempted to take him to the hospital, the youth refused and told them to go across the street. The first EMT obeyed. The second EMT, who was and remains partially deaf, did not. In the subsequent incident report, the EMT describes feeling the compulsion to obey the youth's instructions, but his concern for the young man overrode this compulsion and he continued to provide care. With extreme difficulty, the EMT loaded him into the ambulance. The youth became combative and injured the EMT, who called law enforcement for assistance. Nearby units responded. When officers arrived, the youth continued to fight but weakened quickly due to exertion and eventually began to fade out. Officers were able to take him into custody. Shortly after his arrest, officers discovered the youth had an outstanding warrant for drug distribution and he was transported to jail. Due to the youth's mother having a long history with the agency, personnel were monitoring his movements. As a result, the organization was quickly notified of his arrest. Personnel were immediately dispatched to post bail and bring the youth into agency custody. Upon arrival at NASCU, the youth voluntarily submitted to a paternity test, the results of which indicated that the director of the Agency of Helping Hands is his father. Under these unusual circumstances, the youth was selectively debriefed and enrolled in training to develop employability as a field agent for AHH. It is fair to say that Michael's training has had mixed results. When Michael is motivated and sober, he is an asset. Unfortunately, recovery remains a significant obstacle for Michael and his periods of sobriety have become less frequent over the years. At this time he poses a liability while in the field, and is therefore assigned to AHH NASCU as peer support to other inmates who have demonstrated cooperative traits. It should be noted that Michael's mother is currently incarcerated in Ward 1. She is not cooperative. Michael has stated he is not close with his mother, an assertion that is supported by his behavior. Michael does not foster relationships with his half-siblings Raphael, Charles, and Gabriella, all of whom are employed in various capacities at the agency. Michael is close to T-Class Agent Christoph W. While closeness between T-Class personnel is generally encouraged, this friendship unfortunately led Michael to make poor decisions that resulted in his reclassification from A-Class to T-Class. While a reversion remains possible, it is not likely to occur until Michael satisfactorily overcomes his current struggles. Michael W. is a 26-year-old male with black hair and brown eyes. He is 5 feet 7 inches tall and clinically underweight. His diagnoses include post-traumatic stress disorder, general anxiety disorder, attention deficit disorder, major depressive disorder, alcohol use disorder, and avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. Michael was diagnosed with conduct disorder as a minor, but does not currently exhibit traits associated with either conduct disorder or antisocial personality disorder. He is currently participating in a treatment program administered by Dr. Wingeride. For additional context on inmates mentioned in Michael's interview, please see the files for Inmate 20, Ward 1, the Narc, and Inmate 26, Ward 1. The Big Bad Wolf. It should be noted that Michael was heavily intoxicated during his interview but insisted on scheduling it for today. He also insisted that the interviewer's assistant, T-Class Agent Christoph W., not attend. Interview subject: The Siren, classification strain, cooperative/destructible/gay and/constant/low/demon, interviewer, Rochelle B., interview date, December 25, 2024, when I was 4 years old. My mom realized that I could make anyone accept her do whatever I wanted. That scared her to death, so she basically programmed me to not do it. I was so afraid of her it never occurred to me to deprogram myself. When I was 8 years old, I walked in on my mother skinning a man alive. That scared me to death, but because she was immune to my instructions, that's what we used to call it, my instructions, I couldn't program her to stop doing it. Even before all that, we didn't get along. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't hers. We were too different. She was a good kid who grew into a good grown-up. On the other hand, was a bad kid, everyone said so. Mom, my uncle, teachers. Everyone but my aunt, for as long as I can remember. Mikey, why are you such a bad kid? I didn't know. My mom says I was getting into fights before I could walk. Learning to walk just made me a better fighter. I fought with neighbors, classmates, and cousins. I probably would have fought my mom too if I hadn't been terrified of her. She wasn't a bad mom. She really wasn't. She was just a product, not of her environment, the opposite, actually, but of her own fear and trauma. Her trauma made her excel at everything. She was beyond reproach in every way in everything she did. She was 10 times better than everyone else at everything. She had to be to get a tenth of what everyone else got. She wanted me to be like her. The problem was, I'm not, I'm her opposite. Her nightmare come true. Her personal front row seat to the consequences of nonconformity. It started early. Really early, like in kindergarten. I was a bad kid. So were half the students in that class. No one ever cared when those kids were assholes. Though. Grown-ups only cared when I was an asshole. Here's an example for you. One morning before recess, this kid stole my Batman coat. I pushed him. I got in trouble for attacking him. He didn't get in trouble for stealing my coat, so the next day, I stole his coat. He pushed me. He didn't get trouble, but I got sent to the principal for stealing and starting fights. That's how it went every single time. There were times I didn't even do anything and still got in trouble. All it took was an accusation and I was screwed. I don't know what you call the opposite of the benefit of the doubt, but that's all I ever got, so I got in a lot of trouble in a very short amount of time. Detentions were just the start. Yeah, detentions in kindergarten. I know, right? Anyway, suspensions followed that, then expulsions. I got expelled for the first time in first grade. First day, in the first grade. Now that song's going to be stuck in my head for a week. God damn it, I'm not saying I didn't deserve the discipline. I already told you I was a bad kid. I probably did deserve it. But my point is this, if I deserved it, 10 other kids in that class deserved it too, but I was the only one who got punished, I noticed, too. And when I asked the kindergartners' version of hey, what the hell, guys? Everyone just told me I was expected to do better because I knew better. One time Mom said, I don't know why you're a bad kid, Mikey, but I know you know better. I need you to start acting like it right now. It's like that she and everyone else assumed the worst of me while expecting the best of me. Nothing I did was right. Nothing I tried was good enough. It would never be good enough, because everyone around me had already decided that I was a bad kid. When nothing you do is good enough, you either break down or give up. At the ripe old age of 8, I gave up and decided to be what everyone had already decided I was, and that, in short, is the story of my life. It's the story of my mom's life too. Everyone also assumed the worst of her while expecting the best. But where I revolted, she complied. That's how she ended up excelling in school and the military and as a cop and at life in general. In other words, she excelled because she followed their rules. She had to follow them 10 times better than anyone else while accomplishing 10 times more 10 times faster than anyone she worked with. But she did it, and she wanted me to do it too. It's not her fault. Mom was a freak for rules because she grew up seeing what happens to people don't follow them. She lost her mom and her uncle. Almost lost her brother, too. She didn't want to lose anyone else, and she didn't want anyone to lose her. She really thought that following the rules 10 times better made her one of them. She really thought she was on their team, and she really thought they were on hers. That changed in 2nd grade. Second day, in the 2nd grade. Shit, man, it was my uncle's birthday party, and it was getting pretty late, which means everyone was getting kind of combative. My aunt started a fight with my mom. My aunt was always starting shit with mom. She and I were a lot alike. It's probably why mom came down on me so hard. Anyway, the neighbors down the street called the cops on us. When the cops came, mom complied immediately. On the ground, hands up. She pulled me down with her. My uncle followed her lead. He was so drunk he face planted and kind of just wriggled while everyone else got down on the ground like mom. She was young, but she was already the matriarch. We all did what she said, except my aunt. She staggered past us. Her feet came within 2 inches of my face. I wonder if things would have turned out better if she'd stepped on me and tripped. If she face planted too and couldn't get up again, just like my uncle, she didn't. She just kept not following their orders, so they shot her. She fell down next to me, choking on her own blood while my mom screamed. My world shattered. My mom was a cop. Cops were the good guys. Good guys don't kill people. So why did the cops kill my aunt? Did that mean cops weren't good guys? And did that mean my mom was a bad guy? Later, mom told me my aunt got shot because she was being bad. I know she was trying to comfort me, but it just scared the shit out of me. That's because everyone, including my mom, told me all the time that I was bad. And between the stress, the grief, the terror, and weird little kid logic, I interpreted her words to mean that good guys are supposed to shoot the bad guys, so of course, that meant the good guys were supposed to shoot me. I had nightmares for weeks, the kind where you wake up sweaty on the verge of wetting yourself. I had nightmares about my aunt drowning in her own blood, and nightmares about my mom putting on her police uniform and chasing me through the house until she caught me. Then she'd tell me I was bad and shoot me. That's what she always said in the nightmare. I have to shoot you, Mikey, because I'm a good guy and you're bad. That was unfair, considering she quit the department after what happened to my aunt. Never even went back to work, but I didn't make that connection. The only connection I made was my aunt got shot because she was bad. People get shot when they're bad. I was bad, which meant I was going to get shot. The nightmares only ended when my aunt came back to life, but I'll get to that in a minute. Everyone in the family changed after that, but no one changed as much as my mom. She quit her job. She burned her uniform in the fire pit out back. She made the department track her down in person to take back her badge and service weapon. She stopped inviting her friends over, because all her friends were cops. She stopped telling me that I knew better. She stopped telling me I had to follow the rules. She stopped telling me I was bad. She stopped doing a lot of things, and she started doing others, like skinning people alive, so I knew what blood smelled like. I got into enough fights to have tasted and smelled both my own blood and other people's blood to recognize it instantly. I hate the smell. It reminds me of how scared I used to get when I bled. It reminds me of the shame that came when I made someone else bleed. And it reminds me of the satisfaction I got whenever I made someone else bleed. Anyway, the point is I started smelling blood in the house. For some reason, I went looking for it. I'm not completely sure why. I think I kind of hoped my mom was fighting someone, just like I did at school. That she was being bad, too. Making someone else bleed. I thought if I could catch her at it, catch her fighting, catch her inflicting pain, catch her being bad just like me, then I wouldn't be so scared of her anymore, except I was never going to catch her, because the blood smell always came from the basement. The basement was always locked. Mom kept it locked way before I started smelling blood. The basement was dangerous. Moldy, soggy, full of sharp, rusty shit, and probably haunted because the house had once been a mortuary. That's what she told me. The basement used to be full of dead people 7 days a week. Some of them are probably still here. Enter at your own risk. I wasn't scared of fights, but I was scared of monsters, and I was definitely scared of ghosts. I was so scared I had a full-on meltdown when my uncle took me down there as a prank. The way the light filtered through the dirty windows, the way the old stains swallowed light and the old implements reflected it to be brighter than bright, was too much. It made me think of ghosts, dead bodies, and zombies dragging me down the drains. It gave me nightmares for months. That's why I stayed out of the basement, even though that's where the smell was coming from. But one night, maybe 2 months after my aunt died, I had a nightmare that sent me stumbling downstairs for my mother. She wasn't in her room or the bathroom or any of the other rooms. That meant she either wasn't home or was in the basement. I went down to the basement. The stairwell reeked of blood. It got stronger and stronger the farther down I went, until it was practically choking me. I heard her voice behind the basement door. I heard my aunt's voice, too. I tried the door. For once, it was unlocked. I walked in on my mom peeling the blue DY skin off a man's back and shaking it out like a bedsheet. My aunt was next to her. She was alive, but wrong. She was patchwork. Her skin was blotchy and all different colors and textures. There were big scars along some patches, mild scars on most, and stitches on a few. She's here, you know. My aunt. She's in Ward 2, anyway. I told myself it was just another nightmare, and went back upstairs, but I didn't sleep. Everyone knows kids are scared of monsters. No one really admits that the only thing kids fear more than monsters are their parents. The love overrides the fear, usually. But I bet even you can recall a time or two when the anger of your mom was infinitely more terrifying than the wrath of God. I think the scariest thing for a kid is having to realize that your parent is a monster. That night, I had that realization. It was so horrible that I did everything I could to convince myself I was wrong, that I told myself it wasn't real. That it couldn't be. That it just another nightmare, no more real than the nightmare where my mom shot me for being a bad kid. I lived in terror for 4 days. I finally decided the only way to prove it was a nightmare was to go back down to the basement. In the daylight, it was obvious the place had been transformed. It was spotless and bright and meticulously organized. Definitely an accurate reflection of my mother's personality, because it was so clean. It was easy to see the bodies chained to the opposite wall. One of them was alive. Squares of skin were missing from his back and his arms. The borders of the wounds were puffy and wet. When he saw me, he begged for help. "I'm sorry," he said. "Please help me. I won't do it again. I won't ever do that again. Please let me out. I'm sorry for doing bad. I'm sorry. I'll stop. Just please let me go." All the old fears came roaring back. Good guys shoot bad guys. But my mom wasn't shooting bad guys. She was skinning them alive, and I was still a bad kid. Badder than ever. I'd been expelled 3 times. My grades were terrible. I started shit to keep people from starting shit with me. Which meant I fought all the time. It occurred to me that I was probably the worst kid my mom knew. That broke the dam, and I started crying. I was crying so hard I couldn't move. I couldn't speak, couldn't even hear the guy screaming. That's how my mom found me. I was sure she was going to take me over to that wall and cut my skin off. Instead, she took me up to the kitchen and made me cocoa. She told me she was sorry that I'd seen the man. I asked if she pulled his skin off. She said yes, she had, but she only did it because he was bad. That made me cry again, when she finally figured out that I was crying because I was scared she was going to skin me for being a bad kid. She started crying, too. She promised she would never hurt me, but I didn't believe her. Every time I made someone bleed, they told me I was a bad kid. My mom was making people bleed. She was killing people, just like the cops killed my aunt. She was a bad guy. Good guys are supposed to fight the bad guys. I wanted to be a good guy, so I called the police. That was the 3rd worst day of my life. When I got my mom arrested, Mom went to jail, and I went to a foster home. I have never felt so powerless in my life. At some point in that foster home, I remembered that I can give people instructions. since my mom wasn't there anymore, she couldn't stop me from doing it. There's a big restriction here. My instructions only work if there's a place involved. For example, I have to say things like, stay here or go there or wait right there or run over there or walk down to Electric Avenue or whatever the fuck. You get it, right? It sounds limiting, but it's really not. I once made my foster brother hide in the closet for almost 2 entire days. My foster parents called the police and everything. The cops talked to everyone and they tried to talk to me, but they didn't get a chance because all I had to do was tell them to go into the kitchen to talk to Brandon and they'd leave me alone. My ability to give instructions was the only power I had, and I misused it. That's what scared people usually do when they have power. And I was scared to my core. Between the instructions and the fighting, I was kind of a monster. I got booted from home to home. I started running away. Once I hit 12 or so, I started staying away. It's kind of a long story, but I eventually fell in with a drug dealer named Shay. He appreciated my ability to make people follow instructions. Unlike my mother, he wanted me to use it. I was 13, and I thought Shay was awesome. He treated me like I was awesome, too. So did his people. They all went out of their way to treat me like I was valuable. None of them wanted me to change. No one wanted me to behave differently. No one wanted me to tamp down the one thing that made me special. No one had ever done that for me before. To everyone else, I was still the bad kid. The problem child. The fuck-up who couldn't do anything right except hurt other people. But Shay and his guys made me feel like I was enough. They made me feel like I belonged. That's why I worked for him. Ran lookouts, mostly. That's actually why they started calling me the Siren, because I was an early warning system. If bystanders started clumping around or if someone got too close or looked a little too hard, I sent them away. If the cops started sniffing, I tapped them on the shoulder and told them to go somewhere else. It worked every time. In return, they paid me, bought me fast food and gas station snacks, and drove me to the prison to visit my mom every couple of weeks. They were cool with what I could do for a long time, but they stopped being cool with it, and with me, once I got a peek behind the curtain and I saw that everything was beyond fucked up. You know what that's like. I know you do. I've seen your file. I didn't want anything to do with any of them after that. I wanted to leave, but that's not how it works, especially not when you know everything. Especially not when they know you can compel anyone to do just about anything. And just like that, this thing that helped me fit in, that made me important, that gave me power, made me a target. Power becoming your weakness is such a fucking trip. Anyway, it got really bad really fast in ways I don't want to explain to you, so I had to run. I had to leave the East Coast. I didn't even get to say goodbye to my mom. 6 months later I was sleeping on the street in Las Vegas. A month after that I got into a fight and got arrested. An old warrant for drug possession with intent to distribute popped up, and it was a mess. Because I was still a minor, they contacted my uncle. When he called, I was happy. I thought he cared. I thought he was going to figure out how to get me home. Instead, he told me my mom was dead. She fell in her cell and bashed her head open, and he told me it was all my fault. He said if I hadn't called the cops, she wouldn't have gone to jail and she wouldn't be dead. That was the second worst day of my life, learning that I had killed my own mother. I won't bore you with jail. I'll skip right to the interesting part, which is Christoph posting my bail and telling me to come with him. I didn't want to. It was that energy he gives off, the kind that makes you feel like you're trapped in a basement with a hungry monster, and I've always been scared of monsters. In my defense, Christoph would in fact be an uncontrollable monster anywhere but here, so would you, eventually. For that matter, so would I, but he won me over pretty quick, the way he wins everyone over except you. Not that it was hard for him. I was desperate for help and acceptance. He offered the first immediately and the second consistently. It felt like he was my only friend in the world. I still feel that way. Don't get me wrong. He is what he is. He's a monster, just like you and me. But the only thing separating a monster from a hero is the right purpose. That's all he wants, but they won't let him have that. If they do, their whole house of cards comes tumbling down. That's actually something you need to know, assuming you haven't figured it out yet. The Pantheon runs because of us. Because you and me and Christoph and all the other inmate workers do all the goddamned work. Now I'm going to tell you your future by telling you my past. After Christoph brought me here, they took me downstairs for rehab. Once I sobered up, they stuck me in foundational training. I did well, so they started introducing me to different inmates. They started me in Ward 2. That's standard procedure. You only started in Ward 1 because you're their special girl. You are, though. Your background is exactly what the agency appreciates and what my father in particular respects. He's really happy with you. That's why you keep getting away with making catastrophic mistakes, because he's already decided you're the kind of person we need. The agency usually has to work hard to clean up T-class agents. Look at Christoph. Look at the cleanup crew. Holy God, look at the March Hare. You think Christoph is bad, and he was, but you just wait. You're going to see the difference between a man who wants desperately to be good and a man who just loves being a monster. And look at me. They really had to clean me up. They had to catch me up on school, too. Between school, training, and fieldwork, I was basically in reform school for 6 years, but you know it? Except for the rehab part, I loved every second of it because everyone here went out of their way to make me feel like I belonged, so they started me on Ward 2. Unlike Ward 1, it's rough. More like a county lockup than a federal prison. There's tragedy and horror, just like here. But there's more darkness down there. Less redeemability. Or at least, less desire for redemption. Not because they're worse than me or you or Christoph or the rest, but because they are not safe enough, and in most cases, have never been safe enough, to have the bandwidth to even think about redemption as defined by other people, let alone want it. I get it. I've been there, anyway, so after I passed the Ward 2 assessments, they started training me for real. It was fucking great. For the first time in my life, I was excelling at something. I finally understood how my mom felt. Excellence really is its own reward, at least under the right circumstances. Plus, I got to work with Raphael. I had a badass big brother, which was awesome. Not as awesome as having Christoph as a crazy uncle. But pretty close, you know. Towards the end of field training, I almost died. The three of us, me, Raphael, and Christoph, were hunting this monster. We cornered it using the usual bats hit field agent methods. It was going well, exactly how it was supposed to, but there was something we didn't know. This monster absorbed energy from thunderstorms, and it was raining. The instant thunder roared, this thing broke its restraints and knocked Raphael out cold. Cracked his head so hard I thought he was dead. When Christoph tried to shield me, it hit him so hard he went flying across the road. That left me. This thing slid across the wet asphalt and clawed at me. Those claws sank into my stomach like a knife through butter and pulled my guts out. Look, here are the scars. The sight of my own wet entrails reflecting a flash of lightning really was something. There were things in my guts, though. Other lights. Like sparks and tiny, bright bugs. I screamed at the monster to stop. He didn't, because that's not how instructions work, so I said, go over to the truck. He did that. But his claws were still tangled in my guts, so I had to follow. But I kept calm, even when I had to feel my entrails dragging along the asphalt. Then I told him to get inside the truck. The field trucks are equipped with these portable cells. It's how we trap and transport. But to let go of my guts first, he climbed inside. I locked the cell and collapsed right about the time Christoph lumbered over. I don't know for sure if Christoph saved me. I guess he didn't. But he was the one at my side keeping me conscious on the way to the hospital. A regular hospital, too, because we were too far from the Pantheon to risk the drive. Anyway, the mission was a success and I got all the credit for it. I still had training left to do, but it was considered a formality. I was 3 months away from being a full-fledged A-class agent. Then Christoph fucked it up. He's my only friend here. I told you that. Well, it didn't take long for me to figure out that he's second class. The top of second class, sure. But still second class. I wasn't second class, I am now, but I wasn't then, so I decided to look out for him. That included keeping tabs on him, so I watched him. I watched how gentle he was with the cleanup crew. How he balanced the line between paternal and fraternal while ensuring her welfare to the best of his ability, even when it cost him. I watched him turn Petra Soro, who is the definition of an ice queen, into a drinking buddy. You know, when she decides she wants to die, he's the only one who can get her out of it. They weren't the only ones. Look, I know Christoph isn't safe. He has to be taught to see people as people, especially women, especially after reconditioning sessions. That's sick. I know it. But once he's taught to see you as a person, he is the best friend you will ever have, minus the first couple of months after reconditioning sessions. That is, I watched him fall for my half-sister, Gabriella. I watched him mellow out. I watched his teeth fall out. I watched him turn almost normal. And I watched him become happy. Then I watched as they broke the news that it wasn't real. I watched them tell him that Gabriella did it on purpose, under orders, as part of a test to gauge whether he was due for reconditioning. That wasn't the real test, though. They already know he's a simp at heart. The real test was how he reacted to the news. If he got mad, he was fine. If he got sad, he needed reconditioning. He got sad, so they took him downstairs. I waited a day, 2, 3, 4, no sign, no word, nothing. After a week, I went down to see what was going on. When I saw what was going on, my world shattered a second time. It's like I was 6 years old again, watching the good guys shoot my aunt. She's here. Did you know that? My patchwork auntie is in Ward 2, but I didn't know that yet. I only knew what they were doing to Christoph. I couldn't believe it. I asked if they were going to do that to me too. Raphael said no, of course not. Course not, Mikey. That's what we do for T-class inmates. T-class are special. They hold everything together. But they require a lot of work, and Christoph needs more work than all the rest of them put together. Then he showed me his file. His whole file, not just the G-rated version Charlie curated for you. I don't know if I've ever been sicker in my life. You now know that's saying a lot, right? When Christoph finally finished and came back upstairs, his teeth were back and longer than ever. He was funny as hell, but scarier than the ghosts in the basement could ever hope to be. Scarier than anything, scarier than watching my mom skin a man alive. It was bad. They had to teach him how to treat all the women, even the cleanup crew, like people again. I had to help. He's a good student, don't get me wrong. But knowing they'd turned this guy from an adoptive dad and a happy simp to an absolute monster was terrifying, and knowing it wasn't the first time was even worse, so I gave him instructions. I told him to go all the way across the country and stay there no matter what. My instructions are pretty powerful, but they're not nearly powerful enough to compel someone to cross the continent. He got about 100 miles away before reality kicked in and he came back. Christoph told them all about it. How could he not? He's the company man. This agency is all he knows. It's the only place that's ever treated him like he belongs. I was so afraid they were going to send me to Ward 2. Or downstairs. Instead they reclassified me to T-class. Administration played it off. They told me it wasn't as bad as it sounded. They even said if I behave and submit to testing and restrictions, I could eventually return to A-class, as long as I worked very, very hard. When they said that, all I could think of was my mom. How she was right after all. That the only way I was going to get what everyone got is if I worked 10 times harder, 10 times longer, 10 times better than anyone else. And like my mom, the agency still made me feel like we were all on the same team. It was easy. I was still good at what I did. I still had a built-in family. I still had Christoph, who didn't hold anything against me and was actually afraid I'd hold it against him. I don't. I really, really don't. At the end of training, they assigned me to Ward 1. That was almost crazy exciting. Ward 1 is elite. It's where the wildest, strongest, most powerful inmates live. It's where all the other T-class inmates live. It's where Christoph lives, and I was so excited to meet other people like him. On the day I moved in, they took me to each cell, one by one. They saved my mom's cell for last. For the third time in my life, my world shattered. Up until that point, the agency of helping hands felt like a miracle. Even after my demotion, I felt like I'd been catapulted from a death trajectory into a fantasy kingdom where all my dreams had come true. Where I had friends, where I had a family, where I had a purpose, where I belonged. When I saw her in her cell, I learned the same lesson she had to learn all those years ago. I'm on their side, but they're not on mine. When they're not on your side, it doesn't matter if you work 10 times harder, 10 times longer, 10 times better than everyone else. The only thing that matters is what they decide you are. The agency has decided that I am a T-class inmate. That means they have decided that I am a monster. After all these years, I'm still just the same bad kid. That was the worst day of my life. When I realized that nothing had changed except for the worse. That I'm stuck here forever, and so is my mom. We are never getting out, and it is all my fault. That was 3 years ago, and I've been a fuck-up ever since. I've had a couple of periods of competency. Including one right before you got here. That's how the cycle goes, very low lows, very high highs. When I'm on a high, I'm the best they've got. But when I'm on a low, I'm the biggest liability in their history. If I wasn't the director's kid, I'd be down in Ward 2 with everything else that's too dangerous to be free but too unimportant to fuck with. That's where we go when they're done with us, if we're lucky, Ward 2. If we're not lucky, we go to RD, you know, we're really alike. To the point where it's spooky. Not identical but similar. It's interesting, but scary as hell to me. But you know what? Our differences actually scare me more than our similarities. They make me mad too. You and I, we grew up the same, figured out we could do special things the same, used those special things to survive the same, used them to exert power the same, got in with the wrong people the same, broke the law the same, and ended up here the same. Before that, we even both ended up in jails, except I ended up an inmate, and you ended up a jailer. That's what I don't get. Even though you used your ability to ascend a human staircase, you built your very own self with people who never had a chance against you. You're the favorite. Even though you fuck up here every other day, they have big plans for you. If you don't piss them off, and it's starting to look like you can't, even when it looks for all the world like you're trying, you'll end up in administration. I know they haven't told you. Officially they haven't told me, but trust me, the director's just waiting for your scales to come back in. No, Christoph didn't tell them. What do you mean? How would Christoph know about that? Well, I guess that's another difference between us. Christoph couldn't keep my secret literally to save his life or mine, but he kept a secret that he thought might save yours. See what I mean? I get punished, you get rewarded, and that's where we're at now. Where I've always been. You and I, we basically did the same shit. When I did it, they scrapped all their plans for me. When you did it, you turned into a rising star that even Christoph respects. You know, he can like people, he can want them, he can care about them, and every once in a while he can even love them. But he doesn't respect them. He didn't really respect Gabriella. He doesn't even respect me, just another difference between you and me, and it's not your fault. None of this is your fault and I know it, but I hate it and I kind of hate you for it. It reminds me of how I felt back in kindergarten. Where I'd behave the same as the other kids, but they got excused and I got punished. I know I'm not being fair. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong.